we're back, and I've added some paints to our palette here because we're going to start adding some metallics and some iridescent paints to our fish scales. You can see here on the palette we have some metallics. This is a graphite gray. I might not end up using it, but I kind of like having it on there in case I want to mix it in for a little extra metallic-y sort of shade. It's kind of like a graphite paint. These paints are all from Golden Heavy Body Acrylics. This is an iridescent silver, pearlescent, and then these three here, although they look like they're pearlescent as well probably, they're actually this cool type of paint called interference paint, where it looks pearly from one direction, but from another direction you'll get a iridescent color showing through. So this first one's green, this one's magenta, and then this one's blue. And I like to mix that into my fish scales to give it some really kind of striking color. Now, whenever you're painting fish scales, you want to base it off of a real-life fish. It just kind of helps you come up with how the colors are going to be blending together or changing. Fishes usually have a darker back. Sometimes the back is even less metallic than the other parts of the fish, and with a sort of silvery sides, and then going to even shinier or sort of pearly looking bellies. So we have plenty of paints to try to recreate that sort of effect. And this is a type of camouflage that they use. They want to have a really shiny belly, so if a predator is looking up at them, they will see what kind of looks like the sun shining through water. And when a predator is looking downwards into the deep darkness of the ocean, they want to have a dark back in order to help camouflage them. So I'm going to just kind of start with the silvery paint, and we're going to be painting on more sort of scaly sort of patterns, and then we'll glaze some shades over top to unify the surface as well. But I'm going to start with the silver here, and maybe we'll work on the area we were working on before. Now we water this paint down. We can skim it out over an area and add a really strong metallic effect without covering up the sketch of our highlights and shadows, which is also going to be giving us some sort of non-metallic effect, sort of the effect of the specularity. So you can kind of see the shimmering effect that we're getting. So the fish I'm trying to recreate is actually a mackerel. Mackerels shade to kind of a dark blue on top of them and have really pearly bellies with silvery sides. So I'm kind of adding the silver in now. And hopefully we can see how that's shading. I'm not going to paint the whole model just to save you all time and so you don't have to watch me paint forever. This model is pretty big, so it takes a while to paint, but really has a good payoff because he's so detailed and very interesting. But I think if we kind of glaze that silver in, it gives us a good base to work from. Now, usually we try not to add a lot of water to metallic paints because they become translucent very quickly, and we're usually worried about coverage. But because we have a sketch underneath, thinned down paint, something that's more glazy, is just going to add sort of metallic sheen to that area, and then the sketch allows us to have the highlights and shadows showing through. So we don't want to cover up our sketch with an opaque layer of metallic paint. It's more of a glaze. So add a little bit of water to those metallics and we'll see what happens. I'm going to switch to the pearly paint next to kind of do his belly. On camera it might be a little bit hard to see the difference between these two paints, but the pearly paint kind of has a paler effect. Not quite as silvery, not quite as metallic-y. It still has a nice sort of pearly effect. Alright, maybe we'll do these fingers as well. I think these should be fairly strongly silver, and then we're going to add some color to them. You can really see how our sketch still shows through. We're just getting some metallic effect now, which is pretty cool. We can do a combination effect between the sketch that we apply in sort of a non-metallic metallic fashion, and then we can get the sheen of metallics. So you kind of get the best of both worlds, and it's also a more versatile technique. You can come up with all sorts of interesting effects if you use both metallics and non-metallic theory. Sometimes people think metallics are easier to paint than non-metallics, but it's just really not so. They both have their own theories and techniques that goes along with them, and either one can be painted at a very high level. It's really going to be up to you. I like to combine the two into something a little bit different than what a lot of people are doing, and that's just my own personal preference, and I like to share that with you, and maybe you'll give it a try. Maybe you'll like it too and start painting this way. But if you prefer the non-metallic method, yeah, you can still get very nice looking effects. Or if you want to paint all metallics, there's other methods for that too. We can talk about those in future episodes. Now you really look at it, you can maybe see that blue sheen a little bit. Maybe showing up just a little. Once you paint it out, maybe you can see it on my finger a little easier. Let me go up to his bicep here. I wanted to kind of blend the blue along his shoulder, maybe come down. So I'm just going to go all blue into the shoulder area. And then just kind of pull that down over the place we were painting silver earlier, and we can get a bit of a blend. Now, the name of this paint again is Interference Blue from Golden Heavy Body Acrylics. Yeah, and that gives it that nice sheen. It really stands out. Now, if we didn't have our sketch underneath there, the interference paint would be really confusing and striking. So it's nice that we have that sketch to allow our eyes to see the form first, rather than just this sort of blue blob. I'm going to paint a little bit of that blue along this Terminator line here. I like to kind of hide some of these colors in the skin. You can look at real fish, a lot of times you can see all sorts of interesting colors hidden in there. And for that reason, I might just kind of use very sparingly some of the other colors. I have a little bit of this green. I might use that And this other area down here. And this area is going to be fairly shadowed, but I thought working a little green in there might make it a little interesting. We'll see how that goes. Now I find that this interference paint can be kind of confusing to the eye, but once we use a little bit of ink over top, we can make it a little bit more easy to use. So I'm going to use that marine blue first. Marine blue ink. And you see what we can do using this and the two-brush blending method. Put a lot of ink up there and then blend it down using the two-brush. It's a subtle effect at first, but if you combine a few layers, you can get a nice blend. And some nice color showing through. Now if you use ink with your metallics, it's not going to dull the metallic effect. If you start to use paint, it will dull the metallic slightly. But you'll still get some metallic sheen showing through. I'm going to switch to maybe using a little bit of paint because we want it to dull a little bit. Some Prussian blue. Mix that with a little turquoise. Yeah, that makes a nice rich marine blue. You can use that second brush to just kind of give us some blending, some rough blending. More worried about the color transition rather than the smoothness. Nice, I'm liking how that's looking. But I wanted to get even darker, so I'm going to switch to this indigo ink next, and then we're going to go to Payne's Gray, which is kind of a black analog. It's almost a really black blue. And we can start kind of isolating some of these scales, maybe bringing them forward a bit, kind of bringing some of that texture back in. A lot of times that texture will kind of come out as we blend, because you're using fairly thin paint. It likes to flow a little bit into those crevices. We can get a little bit of that texture. Just don't want to make it, we don't want to make it into a wash. We want to be able to alter the amount of ink being applied to an area, and the two-brush method is a pretty good way to do this. Alright. Starting to look pretty neat. Yeah, I'll go switch to that Payne's Gray. I'm applying this in kind of a dabbing motion. I want a bit of a texture. Just kind of a freehand texture. Mackerels kind of have this sort of tiger stripe texture on the tops of them. I'm not going to go exactly mackerel-ish, but maybe a little bit of texture can be nice. A lot of times fishes have a textured back. Just so they can be sort of close to the surface and adds more visual noise to the so reflections being shone on their backs from the sun. You even dab with the second brush and kind of give it even more texture. Yeah, I like that. What that's doing. Maybe we'll paint another area just so we can see the technique again. Yeah, reposition the model. Let's look at his upper arm here. Once again, we're going to start with our 2 tones of metallics. Now I think that the inner arm is going to be more like the belly of the fish, so we'll go with the pearlescent pigment. We want to spread it out until we can see the sketch showing through. Right. And we'll go to the silver to kind of blend that into. Again, spread it out until you can see the sketch showing through, and we're going to be in business. We're using dabbing motion. You can kind of give the impression of these fish scales. We'll use that interference blue for his shoulders, bicep area. Maybe working in a little bit of this iridescent purple. Yeah, kind of like that, going down into the shadows. Nice. Now let's switch to our blue paint to integrate this. You can still see this texture showing through, which is perfect. Got our marine blue ink. The interference paint tends to work really nicely with ink, kind of reinforcing the color of ink that we were putting on. I use this ink to kind of pick out some of the veins. You can add some texture with it, some extra details, a few little lines. And you can do that because the ink's so translucent. If you were using paint, you would start to lose the metallic effect. Alright, mix some of this graphite gray in because we're losing a lot of the shadows in this top area. So I want to maybe add some of those shadows back in. And this graphite gray can be a good way to do that without losing the metallic sheen. We can add some shadows because it's kind of a dark metallic. Yeah. I like how that's looking. This graphite gray is really a cool paint, and just finely ground graphite in a medium. I'm going to switch to the indigo ink and add some more shadows. We know where the shadows are supposed to go because we can see the sketch showing through, so just add those shadows in. So it has that really stunning fish scale. Has that really stunning fishy blue. Switch to the Prussian blue. Maybe a little bit of Payne's gray. And start to paint these in. I don't want to be painting in everywhere because then I'll be losing a bit of the metallic sheen, like I was saying. These are paints, not inks. So I'm kind of painting more of a texture in. But if we lose some of the metallic sheen in the shadows, it'll be easier for our eyes to pick up what's going on. Yeah, I feel like I'm on a roll here, and I'm just gonna start painting the rest of the model. His chest, maybe I'll make his chest more of the green color. We can use that interference green paint in the chest area. Using reference is really key. So I'm going to use a bit of that interference green. Kind of put a few dabs of that interference green on there we just painted. Add some visual sort of texture. Kind of nice. Little hidden tones of metallic. Even though we have that metallic sheen, we don't lose the shape because we have that sketch underneath. The sketch is what allows us to do that. Now when I add the marine blue over top of this interference green, you can see that the color is a bit different. More greenish. I even use some of this Thaler turquoise to add the texture back in. If we make the shadows painted with paint, you'll lose a bit of the metallic sheen in the shadows, and this actually makes it a little easier for our eyes to pick up what's going on. So it's a good rule to use ink to add a little bit of color, but then switching to paint as you work in towards the shadows.